Good afternoon, Kelly.
Good afternoon.
So good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us here today on Michelle's Conversations That Matter.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so grateful to have met you through a mutual friend. I'm inspired by your story, and I knew I wanted to share you with my audience because of just what you're up to, what you've lived through. You represent hope, I think, to so many people, and I think people really need to hear your story more than anything. So we're going to talk today about the courage to stand for yourself, or the way I promoted it, the courage to jump, which is like really go for it in the face of fear. And I'm excited to have that conversation because I know you've endured some stuff, and I think people can learn from that experience. I think we all have a story, and those stories help people who might be in that same situation. So
Definitely.
Yeah, thank you for being here. So the series itself, Michelle's Conversations That Matter, is designed to highlight stories of perseverance and triumph, but in the context of elevating the conversation around mental health. I want people to be inspired, educated, empowered around their well-being. That's super important to me. And what I do professionally, for people who don't know, I work with organizations to really cultivate cultures of compassion and empathy for the workplace so people can bring their full, authentic selves to work. And I also teach resilience and other tools and tips to help people stay fully empowered and in the cockpit of their lives. So that's what I do. You are here all the way from Connecticut. Yes?
Yep. Yes.
So tell us about who you are, what you do for a living.
So I own two companies. One is called Turning Point Wellness. That's a private psychotherapy practice where I specialize in treating PTSI in EMS professionals. But today I am here to talk about my other practice. It's a private life coaching practice where I specialize in coaching women on how to live radically defiant lives. And I am a licensed clinical social worker, certified life coach, personal trainer, and certified nutrition coach.
Wow, that's a lot. You've got all areas of life covered in your experience, and I think that's amazing.
Thank you.
I think in order for us to kind of get to where you are now, we need to sort of understand your backstory. So, you know, I have been hearing from people throughout this pandemic the issues that are surfacing, and one of them is domestic violence. And we're going to educate the audience that we're now calling it interpersonal violence to accommodate every person affected by this. So, but it's important to talk about it, and I'm really. I really wanted to bring this topic to the audience because I know people, it's on their minds. They know someone, they know of a situation, and under lockdown, things have been incredibly difficult for people. So we're going to talk about that. But according to the White House, I just wanted to read this because it's really telling. According to the White House, as many as 1 in 3 women are subject to domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking at some point in their lives. And the rate is even higher for women of color, Native American women, and women of the LGBTQ community. Growing evidence shows that COVID-19 has only exacerbated the threat of intimate partner violence, creating a pandemic within a pandemic for countless women at risk for abuse. In short, it is an urgent crisis. And that came right out of the White House. So it highlights the importance of how this is all tying into the pandemic. Could we start off by just sort of understanding your story and your experience, and sort of help us understand why it's so hard for people to have the courage to leave an environment like that?
Yeah. So I left a marriage that centered around domestic violence. And it's important for people to understand that domestic violence, we go straight to this idea of, well, if we're calling it this, it means that somebody's putting their hands on you. And it is not just relegated to physical violence. There, as you mentioned, there is sexual violence. There is emotional and mental violence in the form of gaslighting that people are really not. It's so much more common than people realize, but we don't talk about it often enough, so we don't know about it the way that we really need to. Obviously, there's also physical violence, but there's financial abuse as well. So in my case, I was with my ex-husband for just shy of 10 years. We were dating and engaged for about 4.5 and married for 5. And I ended up fleeing from the relationship. My daughter was about 1.5 at the time. And I have the typical story of running out of the house while he was at work with a kid under one arm and a suitcase and a garbage bag of toys in the other hand. And I hid for 3 days with a family member while I was getting the court process started. But the escalation of the content of the relationship was a slow burn. And a lot of people may have the misconception that when a relationship centers on violence, it goes straight to that. And that sometimes that can be the case, but it's not as common as it is for things to escalate very slowly. So for me, it began with mental manipulation and really breaking down the thought process around that I had of who I thought I was coming into the relationship, a very slow process of isolating me from friends and family more and more. Then the financial abuse started, where I didn't have access to a checkbook, our bank accounts. I wasn't allowed to look at any of that. So I had no idea how much money we had at any given point in time. And then it escalated to emotional abuse. And that's when the gaslighting type of behavior really kicked into high gear.
Tell us what gaslighting is, Kelly. Help us understand that.
Gaslighting, the term actually comes from a play that was written, I believe, don't quote me on this, I believe the play was written in somewhere in the 1920s. And the play is actually called Gaslight. The premise of the play is a husband mentally and emotionally manipulates his wife to the point of actually driving her literally insane. She has a psychotic break in the context of the play. Wow. And the way that the story is written, he moves a gas light, like a gas lamp, because that's what they had at that point, around the house at night, and then tells her that she did it. And is so consistent with his story that she ends up believing him and believes that she doesn't remember doing it, but that she did it. And then ultimately it results in her having a psychotic break. So gaslighting is a slow process of consistent, pervasive manipulation on the part of the doing the abusing, to the point where you start to question your own reality. And that was very much the case with me. Again, it started with just kind of breaking down my perception of who I thought I was. And then he actually did start moving things around the house and telling me that I had done it. I was constantly told that I had a terrible memory, that I never remembered anything that he told me. He would make plans at the last minute with friends, go out. I'd have no idea where he was. And then he'd come home and tell me, well, I told you, you just don't remember. He never actually told me. So and so many women, especially, who go through that kind of process will actually end up saying, I would rather have been hit. That would be easier to recover from, right? Yeah. Because you end up questioning your reality, your own perception of reality, to such a degree that it's like, well, can I even trust myself and what I think is real? Can I trust my instincts?
Right.
So being able to rebuild that it's a very challenging process. So that began to escalate, and then over time, there became elements of sexual abuse. And in the last 6 months of the relationship, that's when there began to be threats of physical violence. Which ultimately was the thing that prompted me to leave. So I'm always very clear when I tell my story that he never hit me. He never, aside from the sexual abuse, he never laid a finger on me. And that's an important point to emphasize as we talk about things like this, because it is so important for all people to understand that you can be abused without ever being hit. So I ultimately ended up leaving after he threatened to kill me one night. And I had planned for 6 weeks with family members of how I was going to leave after I disclosed to them what was going on. And the way that I ended up leaving actually wasn't what we planned at all. It was just by chance, this is my opportunity. I'm going now. And then it was off and running. They literally, that I hid, like I said, for 3 days. And the court process took about 6 months. And that was that. And I haven't looked back since.
That's amazing. And I give you such credit for having the courage with a little one to do something like that, to know that that was necessary for your well-being. I mean, that probably took a lot to do that. Why do you think women stay? Why do you think people stay? Is it because you think that like they are so manipulated into thinking that they're the one that is wrong?
I just lost you a little bit.
Oh,
the last thing I heard was why do people stay?
Yeah.
I think that the biggest issue is the level of mental manipulation, like you had mentioned, and that is so pervasive to begin with. Like that sets the tone and it sets the foundation for what the abusive relationship really ends up looking like. And the storytelling that happens in the process of that is so powerful. It is so difficult for people to not believe that story has to be real.
Yeah.
So people end up staying and then layer on top of that or couple that with the level of fear, if there already is an element of physical violence that's happening, that it is terrifying to leave.
And I would think that, like, I think about the recovery process, because that's going to be my next question. Like, tell us the story of your recovery. But like, I would think that would sort of rock you at your core and impact how you entered into future relationships and how you bring that with you, because you've been so manipulated and so messed up with the gaslighting and so on,
Sure.
What was your recovery like, and how do you deal with that?
So for myself, I really like to say to people that I think recovery is forever. And it's a process that doesn't ever stop, because we're constantly evolving as humans, and appropriately so. To be able to pay attention to who you are as you move through the world and what your belief systems are matters so much. But specifically for me, I have needed a combination of my own therapists and support team. I'm currently working with a life coach who is brilliant, and being attentive to that process on an ongoing basis is what creates the recovery. The biggest element of that is, what does it need to look like as you rebuild trust in yourself first, before you attempt to work on trusting anybody else? Because there's such a breakdown in trusting internally when you go through these kinds of things, that being able to have that internal reliance and to be able to say, no, I've got me. I know what's real and what's my truth in here. And then we can begin to extend that into the outside world.
We have a question from Kelly here. She's wondering, what are your thoughts on the legal system around domestic abuse?
I think it really depends on where you live, because this is different state by state. And it's a tough question to answer because it's so dependent on what the court system looks like in your particular state. I can speak to my experience in Connecticut. Connecticut is a very mom-friendly state. So that's important to take into account, because for men going through this and leaving violent relationships, because this does happen to men as well.
Sure.
The court system doesn't feel very fair for a lot of men leaving this kind of relationship. My own experience was extremely positive. I had a very good attorney representing me, and I was not about to go through the court system by myself. That being said, if finances are a barrier to being able to access representation, I would encourage people to seek out legal aid services, and also to call local universities who have law schools. There's a lot of universities who have law schools, and they'll have a center for their students where students are actually able to represent people going through the court system who are not able to afford a traditional attorney. And those students are all supervised by practicing attorneys. So there's 2 universities in Connecticut who offer those kinds of services. So just being able to be, again, regardless of what state you live in, being able to be informed about what services you can access depending on what your financial means are, and knowing how to go and get that help is so important.
And I would presume that the financial aspect of leaving someone who is abusing you, it can play a big role in that. Like,
absolutely,
how would I do that? I don't have the means. I don't have the earning potential. How would I even get an attorney? So this is some really good information for someone who feels like they truly are trapped. That there are ways. Did you lean into like a support community? Did you lean into any groups to help you?
So I was very lucky in that the family that I come from has the means that they were able to help me and that they were able to shelter me. However, before I disclosed to them, I knew that I was going to have to leave. And I had started also looking into domestic violence shelters. So that was the other thing I was going to throw out there for the listener, that not only are there legal options available to you state by state in terms of legal aid, and then universities that have their own law centers, but also look into domestic violence shelters. They are specifically engineered and created for exactly these kinds of things, to help people escape violent situations, to provide them shelter. They protect your privacy for obvious safety reasons, and they can also get you connected to financial resources that can help you along the way.
Awesome wisdom there. Thank you so much. So what did you learn about yourself during this journey, throughout this process that you've been through?
That I am so much stronger than I thought I was, right? Like, this is the amount of stories that we tell ourselves that we think have to be true is profound. And it's up to you to pick up the pen and write the story that you want for yourself. And so often, without even realizing it, we give that proverbial pen over to the people around us and allow them to write the story of us for us when they may not have earned that right. So being able to take that back in the process of leaving this relationship and being able to say, no, this is actually who I am. This is actually what I'm capable of. And now stand back and watch me build and create. It has been incredible, right? Like, this is how we create legacy and self-worth and self-esteem. This is the foundation for all of it.
And the modeling you're doing for your daughter, that's amazing. I think people need to remember, like, I have a friend who is a single father, has 3 beautiful daughters. And I just remind him he's got the ability to model.
Yes.
To model so much good for them in the face of having, divorced parents.
Sure.
I believe that. And you're doing that for your daughter. And I think it's absolutely amazing.
Thank you.
Raising a strong young woman. Oh, God bless you.
She's in the living room right now watching TV.
So tell us how you've been able to leverage all this experience. You're doing such great work. So tell us the story about owning your own private practice. I love that story.
So before I left my marriage, I had been working in community mental health, and I loved the team of people that I worked with, and a supervisor position had opened up. So I applied for it with the backing of my team. And in the process of applying for it, I was pulled to one side by my program director at the time one day. And she had said to me that, we're not even going to consider your application. I think you have more learning to do. And I had been in the field and licensed for some years at that point. My team had supported me. We had great relationships. There was no reason for my application to not be considered. And it turned out that once the position was filled, the position was filled with somebody that the program director had already identified as wanting in that spot. So I was so frustrated at that point, not with my colleagues, but with the political aspect of the organization that I was with, that I said, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm going to go start my own thing and just do it my way. And about 6 months later, I was in private practice.
That's awesome. And it takes something like that. I have a very similar story. Yeah. My listeners know that like it took like one turning point for me to go, oh, really? Really? Yep. Watch me now.
Yeah, exactly.
I know. And so how's it been being an entrepreneur and just trying to do all of this, especially, my goodness, I would think you're busy during this pandemic.
I am so busy in my therapy practice right now that I'm actually looking at scaling and expanding. Yay. So it's possible in the next, I haven't made up my mind 100% yet, but it's possible in the next couple months that I'll have some clinicians working for me.
Wow.
It is, as far as being in private practice in the pandemic is concerned, it's been wild. Yeah. I've been in private practice now for 7 years. And I have never been as busy as I have been in the last year. It's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, that I'm so grateful to be busy because I have a reliable income and I can pay my bills, and I'm not concerned about where my business is going. And so many people have lost so much in the last year. So I'm so grateful for that side of things. And also, if I'm busy, it means that people are suffering. So
yeah, I would think that. What are you seeing? I have interviewed several clinicians and several people on my series here talking about things that they've seen, and
sure,
kind of just trying to help people figure all of this out. What have you noticed is like a common theme?
So aside from a lot of anxiety and a lot of depression, again, in my therapy practice, my primary population is first responders and specifically EMS personnel, and they are just wildly burnt out.
Yeah.
So a lot of what my particular work has focused on in the last year has been really just helping people figure out how to manage that and what does that look like so that they have more longevity in their careers than what they would otherwise have if it wasn't addressed. But to speak to what it's been like, to your question earlier about what it's been like to be in private practice, it's a roller coaster. It is, to be an entrepreneur is terrifying and thrilling, and then terrifying, and then thrilling, and it's the best. Like I joke with people that I'm pretty sure I'm ruined as an employee forever, and I wouldn't change it. This has been absolutely the best thing and the best decision that I've made.
That's amazing. We were talking before we went on the air about managing our fears, and as a new entrepreneur myself, like trepidation every day.
Sure. Totally.
But like, what do you mean when you say if we can manage our fear and have faith and courage, like in the face of fear, what's possible?
So I like to emphasize the point when I'm asked questions like that I've never met a truly brave person who identifies as brave because we're so busy being scared instead. But if you're acting while you're scared, then you're also brave.
Yeah.
And to be able to recognize that and where we source that from inside of ourselves, there's such a well of resilience that we can all pull from if we know how to go there. So actually a few years ago, I was out to lunch with a girlfriend of mine, and I was telling her about something that I had gone through pretty recently at that point. And I said to her, I was explaining how scared I was in the process of this particular experience. And she looked at me, she was like, but you were scared. What? I don't see you as being scared at all, ever. And I said to her, I'm scared all the time.
Yeah.
I'm just not willing to let my fear make my decisions for me.
Mm.
And that's such an important point that we have to keep in perspective, that fear is there to keep us checked. Fear is there to make us pause and really say, okay, have I looked before I leap?
Mm-hmm.
And do I really want to leap?
Mm-hmm.
That matters. So we don't want to stop the process of what fear looks like, but we just don't want to let fear make our choices for us.
Dance with it, right? Just
Yeah,
dance with it.
exactly.
I always love that. Like, feel the fear and do it anyway. Isn't that the saying?
Totally. I have a sign in my office that says, do it anyway.
Just do it anyway. Yeah. So what are you up to next, and how, what can people expect if they were to reach out to you through your unapologyproject.com?
Yeah, so folks are absolutely able to find me online at my website at theunapologyproject.com, and I'm on Instagram and Facebook at Coach Kelly Lynch. I have to call myself Coach Kelly Lynch because the actress Kelly Lynch takes over all of the search results. So Coach Kelly Lynch.
Uh-huh.
But I have plans for a workbook that should be coming out later on this spring, where people can really like go on my website and you can find it once I have it up there, and this workbook will really be all around how do you address your fears in the context of imposter syndrome. So imposter syndrome is something that I address with a lot of my coaching clients because it's such a loud kind of story for all people, right? Like this is something that nobody gets to not experience or gets to avoid. So imposter syndrome is just feeling like you don't belong or feeling like you're not good enough, sometimes feeling literally like you're an imposter and you're waiting for somebody to catch you out on it. So this is all about how can you address that, face your fear, and like you said, dance with it. Just do it anyway. Because if you're not willing to live with your fear and act in spite of fear, then how are we going to achieve dreams?
Yes, I love that. How are we going to be able to achieve dreams? Absolutely, we have to.
Yes.
But this imposter syndrome thing comes up a lot in Clubhouse. I'm in Clubhouse and it seems to be coming up a lot, but I feel like, we put lipstick on insecurity and call it imposter syndrome. It's insecurity. Like, it's the fact that we feel like we're not good enough. The root of it is we're not good enough. You know what? Like, I have a sign posted above my computer. It says there are people less qualified than you doing things that you want to do simply because they believe in themselves, period.
Yeah.
So isn't it all about insecurity when you think about the term imposter syndrome?
That's the root of it, for sure. Absolutely, I agree. And again, to go back to this idea of stories, and especially like how I talked about stories in the context of being in a violent and abusive relationship. Stories, it's such a simple idea, this concept of storytelling, but we invest so deeply emotionally into a story and then make meaning of it. And the second that we're making meaning of what something is in our lives is the second that we start to then act because of it. And really, like, I have insecurities. Every single one of us. That's part of the human experience.
Yeah.
But it's a matter of, are you going to act because of it and stay small? Or are you going to act in spite of it and grow?
The thing I do love about imposter syndrome, that people are actually more comfortable owning those insecurities by that label and therefore talking about it. So
sure.
I can't tell you how many rooms I've seen in Clubhouse, how many times it's come up where people are just like, yeah, I have imposter syndrome. It's like they would never admit I'm incredibly insecure, but they're comfortable. That term is almost given them the permission to openly discuss it without embarrassment or fear. And I think that is a huge gift that people
Sure.
are comfortable talking about it.
Absolutely, because if we label something as insecurity, we automatically also start to weave an element of shame in. And that's where that emotional investment starts to come into play, and we make meaning of it. And that's where people will, like it, I commonly see people start to tell stories of, I can't, here's why.
Yeah. Shame. Oh my God. That's a whole other conversation we could have.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, absolutely. So any final words of wisdom as we start to wrap up that you want to leave the audience with, maybe someone, just any of the listeners, anything you want to leave?
You know, I love it when I come across women who aren't willing to take no for an answer.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to teach as many people as I possibly can that even when you're coming up against what feels like a barrier or a roadblock, there's always a way. Sometimes we have to get creative with finding the way or creating a way, but there's always a way. And if you want it bad enough, anything's possible.
Mm.
That's it.
Thank you so much, Kelly. It was so good to have you. Such a great chat. Thank you for educating us too about domestic violence. I mean, it's so important and so needed. So,
yes.
And thanks for sharing your time with me today.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome, and we will stay connected.
Definitely.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.